So just a little land acknowledgement before we get started. So Green Venture recognizes that the land we are on is on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Ottawandaron nations within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon, Wampun Agreement. We acknowledge that Green Venture is also part of this agreement and are committed to being stewards of the land. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So tonight's webinar, we will talk about who we are, what is the Miyawaki afforestation method, how to plant your own mini forest, what is the mini forest at home program, and answer any questions you may have at the end. So we'll have Juliana start with Green Venture.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know about Green Venture, we are an environmental not-for-profit organization which works in Hamilton. We work to empower Hamiltonians to implement greener practices in their home and community to make our city a climate champion. And we have programs spanning a wide range of areas. We have programs focusing on energy efficiency. We do home energy audits and support folks to get rebates. We also have a strong community greening program, and we work on green infrastructure and nature-based solutions as demonstration projects, providing rebates to support those. We also do quite a lot of work on tree equity and tree planting, and the Mini Forest Project is part of that. We have an active community garden program as well, and run several seed libraries and Grow a Row program. And we have an extensive education programs in school and in the community, and quite a few youth focused programs. And I will just hand it over to Heather to tell you a little bit about Network of Nature. And we've been working, just to give you a little background, with Heather and her team at what was previously CanPlan and now Network of Nature to launch the Mini Forest Project in Hamilton since 2021.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me here. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here this evening. I'm a landscape architect, arborist, and ecologist with Dugan & Associates, which is an ecological consultancy based out of Guelph, Ontario. But here I'm kind of wearing my Network of Nature hat. And so the brief background behind that is in 2004, Evergreen, which is a Canadian not-for-profit committed to improving livability and sustainability within cities, transferred their native plant database over to our firm, Dugan & Associates, because they could no longer continue to manage it. So we became the custodians, and at that time rebranded it as CanPlant and promised to continue freely providing this resource to Canadians. More recently, so I guess beginning in 2020, we started conversing with Canadian Geographic about potentially partnering, which became formalized in the fall of 2022 under another name, Network of Nature. So what was Evergreen's native plant database then became CanPlant, and it's now Network of Nature. And it is now, we're involving a number of different groups and partnerships trying to develop this resource and to ensure that it remains something that Canadians and anyone engaged can freely access. All right, so what is the Miyawaki reforestation method? The Miyawaki method was developed by Japanese botanist Akira Miyawaki, so pictured here, and it aims to restore small, diverse forest patches that help combat climate change, increase local biodiversity, and increase tree canopy in urban areas. They're also called mini forests, tiny forests, pocket forests, and little forests. So we know that after natural forests are removed, recovering and reestablishing a mature forest can take anywhere from 100 to 1,000 years. We can say that, yeah, this methodology is really to target late succession forests by densely planting trees to encourage upward growth, increase and using a variety of species that will emulate that late forest succession community. And the method also highly emphasizes including soil amendments. So the dense planting encourages mutualistic and competitive interactions among the plants, such as connections with soil microorganisms and competition for light that encourages that forest growth, that upward as opposed to outward growth. And by planting species that are kind of the end point of succession, for like the climate community for the region, this in a sense kind of skips steps 2 to 5 in this figure, thereby decreasing the time it takes for late succession forests to be established. Next slide. All right, so there's been many claims made around the globe about the benefits provided by planting Miyawaki forests. These claims may be true in India, Japan, or the Netherlands. However, we've only just begun exploring this methodology in Canada. It will take some time to monitor and compare these plantings to traditional reforestation plantings and to compare to other landscape treatments. Our team is not so hung up on the claims. What we're really interested in is determining if this method is a viable tool to sequester carbon while increasing urban canopy cover and bolstering biodiversity. This is about reforesting some of our traditionally forested landscapes that have been cleared since colonization. Next slide, thanks. So here's an illustration of a typical urban tree planting treatment. You have your lawn and then your shade trees. But below ground, tree roots are competing with the grass roots and may be too far apart from one another to benefit from community mycelial connections. Miyawaki forests, on the other hand, is a landscape treatment that more closely resembles a thriving biodiverse Canadian forest landscape. This method pushes for a minimum of 30 species and recognizes that trees need fungal partners to thrive. The average 60 centimeters on center, so that's the spacing, ensures mycelial networks can connect to multiple trees. And with a density of tree species, also known as host plants, there's typically a diversity of other species that can feed, breed, rest, and nest. So Miyawaki forests were first established in Japan, and this approach was brought to other countries by Miyawaki himself, who then inspired others like Shubhendu Sharma in India, who later popularized the approach with a TED Talk in 2014. You can still find it online. Since then, they've taken root in Malaysia, Brazil, Kenya, the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Italy, the UK, Australia, US, and Canada. And there are more than what this depicts, because this image hasn't captured all of the ones that are now in Canada too. So in Canada, we have roughly 8 forest regions. They're shown here. We're of the mind that many forests are a way to reforest previously forested land regions with appropriate species. Since we embarked on this project through the Network of Nature, we've had the great privilege to engage with multiple groups from across the country. These hot pink dots signify areas where at least one mini forest is planned or planted. All right, so here are a couple examples. You can see here the city of Calgary has planted a few Miyawaki forests. So these are some images that they provided us. And they've used locally native species and have only planted within parts of the city that are traditionally forested, so not within the prairie areas. And then on the other side is a planting that we were involved with at the Toronto Zoo this past October. We planted in that median that's highlighted with the teal. So it's in the parking lot right by the entrance to the Toronto Zoo. And we planted just under 1,000 trees and shrubs. I had a number of volunteers engage in that activity. And here's one of the earlier plantings, so still recent, 2021. This is by Alpa Evolution, and they planted right in the city of Montreal. So there's a photo, the first year was planted, and then a couple photos taken from this past summer and fall.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I'm going to take over and give some bit of background on the steps in the Miyawaki afforestation method, and then also some Hamilton examples. So these are the typical steps that you would find in the traditional Miyawaki method that's found in the literature. You would start with selecting your native species and their ratios based on the site conditions, and then also researching the forest layers and planning your species to meet the forest layers that are in your native forest. And then you would prepare the site, and the approach that's been used previously is to go down to a meter depth to amend a meter deep of soil. And so you would remove that soil, put half back and half amended with whatever's locally available of, organic matter, compost, agricultural things that are available locally, mulch, that kind of thing. Prepare that soil that way, and then you'd be ready for planting. And you'd plant quite densely, as Heather mentioned, with 4 trees within a square meter. The usual full size of a mini forest is about a 10 meter by 10 meter plot. And then you'd have a plan for maintenance, obviously, and monitoring as well, and ensuring that the trees are watered and cared for, and fenced if it needs to be. And so we used this approach with some kind of caveats, and planted some mini forests in Hamilton. The photos on the left are from our planting that we did in partnership with Heather's team and the City of Hamilton forestry section at Windermere Basin. And we also planted another smaller plot on the right that's at Green Ventures sort of home base at Eco House in East End, Hamilton. So the plots on the left at Windermere Basin, this is an area in Hamilton that's undergone extensive rehabilitation since 2006. There's a lot of contamination and degradation in that. It was previously a wetland, but over time it had been filled in with all kinds of things, and then eventually sort of resculpted to be useful as for biodiversity and for habitat restoration. So the area already included some berms of soil that the city had excess soil, and they were sort of placed along the trail there. So it was suggested from the City of Hamilton this would make an ideal sort of test plot because the soil there was already amended. So we went with that as one of our first pilot locations, and it was sort of a sandy loam, essentially clean fill that was dumped at that area, shaped into the berms. The site was then mowed, and heaps, like the tallest mulch piles we've ever seen were left on the site for quite some time. And then with volunteers, they worked really hard, and we eventually spread that all out and planted in that area in October in the fall of 2021. 300 trees and shrubs went into 2 10 by 10 meter plots. We had roughly 30 different species, things like white oak, cherry birch, hickories, Kentucky coffee tree, white pine, and we made use of those different structural layers. We had some meadowsweet and sort of shrub things as well. And then we went back in June and did some stewardship and removed. There wasn't much by the way of invasive species coming in. The mulch layer is really thick there. But we also took some time during that spring and into the fall to do some monitoring, and have set up some 2-meter radius plots collecting baseline data and starting some photo monitoring to see the progression of the growth there over the years. And then on the left, the Eco House demonstration. This is a much smaller sort of mini forest. We planted that with sort of as a test of our idea of mini forest at home, and how that could work as a community demonstration plot. And so we wanted that to be an area where we could try it out and see how it works on a smaller size, and if that technique can work for someone's backyard, for example. So at EcoHouse, again, we've got naturally occurring sort of sandy loam. We sheet mulched that area. So we put down a thick layer of compost, and then a layer of cardboard, wet the cardboard, and then a thick layer of mulch on top, and waited a couple of months and then planted in the fall. Okay, and then since then, so just this in 2022, we have again partnered with the City of Hamilton to put in some further mini forest plots. The one on the left is in Dundas at Morton Park. The one on the right is in Stony Creek at Lake Avenue Park. Yeah, and if we just, the next slide, please, Bella. Great. Okay, so these are the typical steps if you're thinking about this. I see quite a few folks on the call who are from not-for-profits, or maybe thinking about doing this themselves. So the steps are selecting a site, obviously, and then choosing your target forest community, sourcing your native plants, and then preparing the site. And this might require some kind of mechanical decompaction depending on what's happening with your soil, and potentially organic amendments. Surface mulch application, we're finding, has been really, really beneficial, and it's increasing the organic matter, just making that soil that much more easy to plant in, and adding nutrients over time. And again, the soil prep will depend on the conditions of your site. And a little later on, Bella's going to go into some detail about what we're suggesting for prepping for the mini forest at home pilots. And then you're on to planting, and using sort of the smallest trees you can find. So bare root saplings work really well, or small potted stock, really nothing bigger than sorry, what is that size pot? Blanking on it right now.
A gallon?
Yes, not bigger than a gallon pot. Thank you. Just because the roots by that point are most likely encircled in that pot, and it's just not necessary to go a bit bigger than that. And lastly, we're trying to put in a plan and ensure that we, as an environmental group, are there for the sites that we're planting, and ensuring that there's monitoring there, and watering and care, at least for the first 3 years. And I think I will leave it there and hand it off to Bella to continue.
Perfect. Thank you. Let me go next. So the mini forest at home program, why plant mini forest at home? So in the case of Hamilton, the city of Hamilton declared a climate emergency in March of 2019. And since then, the importance of trees and expanding canopy cover has become even more apparent. Trees not only mitigate the risk of climate change by absorbing and storing carbon dioxide, but they also make cities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. Unfortunately, traditional tree planting in Canada does not replicate the structure of a natural forest. Trees in city are often planted in rows, have low species diversity, are all the same maturity, and little to no soil amendments are conducted. This means that the benefit of natural forests are not fully realized by these standards of tree planting practices. Currently, Hamilton stands at a 21% canopy cover, lower than average compared to other municipalities in Ontario, and 2/3 of the 30 cities' 30% goal. The Carolinian forest region is very diverse. However, in Hamilton, species diversity is low, with 29% of the leaf area in Hamilton identified as invasive species. Urban canopy cover is shrinking while impermeable surfaces are increasing, leaving less green space in our city. And to accelerate tree growth and reach the city of Hamilton's target of 50,000 trees planted annually, according to the draft community energy and emissions plan and the 30% canopy cover, innovative and holistic tree planting and forest restoration approaches need to be tested and applied. With limited space to grow, mini forest or Miyawaki-inspired forest restoration can provide a solution to increase tree canopy cover and forest health in smaller places, like in your backyard. So this program is funded through the Duger Foundation of the Hamilton Community Foundation with the support of Conservancy Society of Hamilton and District. This funding will run until this June, but we're hoping that this project will go on longer. Mini Forest in Dundas will serve as a pilot for applying this method across Hamilton. We aim to plant 1,000 trees in Dundas by the end of the pilot, with 600 trees and shrubs already planted at Morton Park in Dundas, and around 300 soon to be planted across school grounds, businesses, and community members' home through our Mini Forest at Home kits. This goal is to increase the canopy cover in Dundas to restore green space, increase biodiversity, manage stormwater, improve air quality, and provide spaces for the community to connect to nature. So how does the Mini Forest at Home program work? So the first step to this program was to open applications for the Dundas community's members to apply specifically for the Mini Forest kits. So back in late November to early December of 2022, we opened applications, promoted it through our social media, local newspapers, etc. We explained what is expected from this project and what would you receive for the applicants who are applying. So currently these Mini Forest kits was open to Dundas residents, schools, and businesses due to the grant application. And to be eligible for this, applicants would need enough space to fit a 3x3 meter plot, which the applicants would prep the site and eventually plant 36 native trees and shrubs. They would also have to recruit or have a dedicated tree care team to help water, weed, and mulch for at least 3 years. Green Venture would also provide support when needed. So successful applicants will be provided with these 36 trees, which we would select, compost and mulch. We would also support for planting site prep, tree planting, designing, and any other resources and help the successful applicants would need. And then after applications close, we move on to setting an in-person or virtual consultations or both. So we would review the process of the kits again, what's the expectations of the site host, answer any questions the applicants had, and assess their sites if they are eligible. So some eligibility includes having enough space, no overhead wires, the plot would not be near any existing trees or structures. And then after the consultations are over, we move on to approval. So we selected X amount of sites based on the site conditions, review terms and conditions, also attend a webinar such as this. And then currently we're moving on to site preparation planting. So to get started on preparing your mini forest, as mentioned before, you would remove any weeds, rocks, or other materials within the plot, and you would dispose of the yard waste appropriately. You would also mulch and prep the site with compost, which would be delivered by us or from a local organization to the applicants' homes. So there are 2 options for site prep. So the dig or no dig option. So the dig option is, as mentioned, to dig to 1 meter deep put half the loose soil back into the ground, and then the other half of the loosened soil will be amended with the compost provided. And then you would add that back into the soil and about add 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top of the amended soil. And the no dig option is adding layers of cardboard or newspaper as we did at Eco House, watering it well, and follow this step with 1 to 2 inches of compost over your planting site, and then adding the mulch on top. And then you will let that mulch and compost sit for a minimum of 1 to 2 months to allow them to decompose and release all that good nutrients back into the soil. And trees and shrubs are selected based on the soil type and light conditions of each site. So many of the sites selected were obviously all different, whereas some of the soil were more clay, whereas others were sandy loam, rocky, etc. Same goes for light conditions. Some of the homes in Dundas do have some couple of mature trees, which provide more shade to the site, whereas others have 2 acres of open field. And then the last expectation of the successful applicants is to maintain and monitor the plot for up to 3 years. So as mentioned, like watering, weeding, taking any photos, reporting any issues, anything else that the site host, any questions that they would want us to answer, any other issues. So here is an example of a species list that you would include in your mini forest. So while doing this on your own, you can begin to develop your species list as your site is being prepped. So you would look for 15 to 20 different native species that are best suited to the area being planted. Be sure to include canopy, subcanopy, understory trees and shrubs. Plants can be bare root or in small pots, and trees can be, and the shrubs can be planted at random. So this is to mimic a natural forest. Not everything's going to be perfect, evened out. It's literally all at random, which is kind of the fun part of it. We also developed a mini forest at home how-to guide. So for anybody who's looking to do this on their own, we kind of have all the steps that we've been talking about: how to prep, plant, examples of the species list, how to water and maintain. I will be sending this resources along with others after the webinar. And then this is actually an example of a mini forest in a backyard. So this is Heather's personal owned mini forest. And if Heather wants to kind of chime in and talk about the steps that she went through.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this, I prepared the site in early summer. There initially, when we bought the property, it was grass with a hedge, a privet hedge on one side, and then some rows of Sharon trees on it, like kind of small trees on the other side, with some garlic, mustard, and other like lilac and stuff. So we removed everything pretty much and covered it with cardboard, and then put compost on top of that and mulch on top of that, and let that sit throughout the summer months. And by the time I was ready to plant in September, there was no evidence of the cardboard anymore. It had all decomposed, and it was just nice friable soil. So although earthworms are problematic being in North America because they're not from here, and they're a little too effective at moving nutrients about in the soil, they did a really good job in my backyard. So it was really mixed in. Yeah, so I just planted those, and then first winter I had a fellow rabbit that pretty much clipped almost all of these trees and shrubs. So I ended up putting hardware cloth below that fence to try to keep them out this winter. But they grew up pretty well. Some of those trees are early succession, so I removed them because they were growing a little too quickly. So it's a bit shorter than in that second image now. But it's mostly oaks. There's hickory, some hemlock, Oh, there's a whole slew of plants. There's, I think there's more than 30 species. I've thrown in some like odd species as well, just for fun, or they were given to me. Like I have a couple pawpaws and some dwarf hackberries. So they don't really go, but I think it'll be fun to collect some fruit from them at some point. And this takes up 2/3 of my backyard because I'm downtown Guelph. I don't have a big yard.
And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening in. And if anybody